Hello, and welcome to our online session for pricing. Now, before we start our session, please note that you have to read the chapters before you begin this session. Basically, an online session helps us from not coming to class and cover up more of the material. At the end of the material, you have been already assigned an exercise to do to also show me that you've learned what I've thought. And if you need any help or send me any questions, feel free to do so. On top of that, why I'm putting these sessions online, because most of this is covered in other subjects such as economics, psychology, consumer behavior, advertising, and branding. So it becomes partially redundant to my course, and therefore we all have this wonderful chance of using online technology, or I would say rather videos, to communicate one way. All right, so let's begin this session. This is called pricing. It's based on chapter 11 and 12 from your Principles of Marketing book. And this pricing is not about cost that we spoke about in class. This pricing is from the manufacturer point of view. So without further ado, let's proceed. So we have two chapters studied. So I've divided them into part 1 and 2. In part 1, we will learn, first of all, what is a price and what are the different pricing strategies. And on top of that, what other internal to the company and external to the company, what are the considerations that affects decisions on giving your brand or your experience a certain price. And that is the essence of pricing in the beginning. But as we'll find out, people usually think from one mode, which is cost-based, and whereas marketers should be thinking from value-based. So let us proceed to the next slide. What is a price? Price is the amount of money charged for a product or service. It is the sum of all the values that consumers give up in order to gain the benefits of having or using a product or service, which is when we consider the formula for value, which is total perceived benefits minus the total perceived cost. That is what a consumer is really giving up. Price is the only element in the marketing mix that produces revenue for the company, meaning if you don't put a price on our product or service, we don't earn anything. Therefore, there's no exchange of real value, or I would say there's no real transaction. The main type of pricing that we do is called customer value-based pricing, meaning we base the price on the perception of the customer, and which we'll see in the next slide. Now here you have a little diagram, and you see there are two things to consider. One is the customer's perception, which is yay here. Well, let me erase that. That looks disgusting. And the product cost. Okay, there are two modes. But if you look from the customer point of view, you can say that is this price ceiling, meaning how much, which extent would a customer be willing to make a payment? If you ask a customer, let's say in research, how much would they be willing to pay for a bottle of water? And they say, well, I'm willing to pay up to $2 or €2. And above that will be a ripoff. But according to us, in order to produce a bottle worth $2 to the customer, it should not be below a certain margin of production. Meaning if we produce a water bottle for €2 for a customer to buy for €2, then we're not making any money. We'll go into losses. So value-based pricing uses the buyer's perception of value, not the seller's cost, as a key to pricing. Price is considered before the marketing program is set. Now, a great example is luxury products. Luxury products always price things very high. However, the production may not be that expensive. Producing a phone like the Apple phone for 6S costs, through a study, up to $250 with all the cost consideration, meaning from production to marketing to sales and support. However, they charge you $800 to more than that for the sales price. Now let us compare. Further down the road, next slide. In this comparison, you see cost-based measured up against value-based pricing. Cost-based pricing is old school, but it's still done till this day. It is not essentially the right way to do things, but in some considerations, it can be considered okay. In cost-based pricing, first you make the prototype of the product, then you determine how much input went into it in terms of materials, labor, and all those things. Then you set a price based on the cost that you accumulated. This is very accounting, traditional finance method. And then you add a markup to it. And then you finally convince the buyers that please come and buy the product. If you reflect on it carefully from chapter 1, marketing orientation concept, this could be considered close to anything else other than the marketing concept, that is production, product based, or even sales based. You convinced people to buy it, you've set a price on it, but you're not really doing any perception marketing on this, meaning you don't ask the consumers how much you think it should be priced at. So in value-based pricing, you first speak to the customer and ask them what is the solution they're looking for. And according to what they want and what they need, you set a price on it and to match the perceived value. For example, if they feel a product such as a water bottle, like Evian, should cost up to 50 cents to €1, but if they can get it from a vending machine, nice and cold, close to their home, close to their schools, then they said, okay, €2 or $2 is fine too. So we set the target price and match it according to the perceived value. Now, perceived value is not true value, but we should not charge higher than that. Okay? So, and after that, we determine the cost that can be incurred, meaning that we really have to do a research in our supply chain where we can get the most efficient, optimal input that reduces the overall cost per production. And after that, we design the product to deliver desired value at target price. Now, it's a complete opposite of what we just saw in cost-based pricing. And therefore, that is true marketing. First, you go find what the customer is looking for, put a price on it, and then determine the cost all the way back. And this is true marketing in all the sense. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there are 4 different forms of customer value-based pricing. Now, as you can see, there's good value pricing, EDLP, high-low, and value-added. What is good value pricing? This offers the right combination of quality and good services at a fair price. Meaning, if your perception matches the quality that you see, the price should be justified. For example, let's take an example of 2 computers, such as the Apple Mac. Now, quality is a subjective topic. There's conformance quality, there's performance quality. But everyone feels that Apple is somewhat of a premium product. Therefore, they charge a higher price. But if you take it compared to an Asus or Toshiba computer or laptop, they're priced way below. However, in terms of quality, once again, they don't want to set the bar too high. So they say our consumer base or our demand is not for a high-end price or high quality product. We want to be basic. Therefore, the price matches the outlook or the perceived quality of the product. In EDLP, you constantly charge everyday low prices with few or no temporary price discount. Now, places like Walmart, Aldi, and Lidl, they do the same thing. They try to keep the prices as low as possible in everyday routine, like selling groceries and all. And this is for them, they work on low margins of profits, and that is a survival technique. Even Amazon does the same thing. Amazon tries to charge the lowest price it can get, and if you do a little bit of research, you can see that you are getting low prices because there are a lot of vendors who are trying to compete with each other on Amazon. Now, high-low pricing is basically taken on mainly by retail outlets, even for clothing. They charge higher prices on a daily basis, but along comes sales and discounts where they want to release their closing stock or stock left over from a certain collection, summer collection, winter collection. And so they run frequent promotions and to remove their closing stock when they have achieved their targets. It's a good strategy, but high-low pricing is used only to remove closing stock or stock that is left. Otherwise, if they constantly charge low prices for retail products, they might lose their brand value. Finally, we have value-added pricing. Now, if you buy, let's say, a PlayStation 4, and they say, you know what, if for 50, or no, let's say for 20 euros extra, we'll give you a we'll give you a 6-month subscription to PlayStation Network and some exclusive titles. Similarly, when you buy a laptop, you have this antivirus already installed along with Microsoft Office, but you have to unlock it. And they say if in order to unlock these features, you just have to pay a little bit more, maybe 20, 30, or even 50 euros more. So they attach value to the bundle. In product market, we call this bundling. And in bundling, we have bundle pricing. So when you buy a laptop, you get the antivirus and the Office pack, maybe even a laptop bag, and they say, just for 100 euros extra, you can get all these features together. What happens here in the sale, the salespeople or the marketer, using brand alliances and partnerships, they get to sell their partner products, who also enjoy the sales transaction as well as brand loyalty. So when you get a regular laptop, you get Windows as an operating system, you get Microsoft Office as a tool to work on, and even an antivirus like McAfee. Please don't use McAfee; it really sucks. So I'm not supporting the product. All right, moving on. Now let's compare to cost-based pricing, which is very traditional. Within cost-based pricing, you have a few things to consider. If you ever done cost and managerial accounting, you might have heard of these terms before. So cost-based pricing is setting price based on the cost for producing, distributing, and selling the product, plus a fair rate of return for efforts and risk taken. So cost-based pricing adds a standard markup to the cost of the product. Very traditional. You produce let's say a phone or even a DVD for, let's say, 12 euros, 10 euros. So you charge a 50% markup. So that goes for, 15, 20. If you produce it for 10 euros, you charge 15 euros. You make 5 euros profit. Very traditional way of doing things. So what are the costs to consider? Number one are fixed costs. Fixed costs of your organization, such as rental of your factory, heating costs, electricity, other assets that are used, even including your employees who were working on the product. They're all things to consider. On top of that, a variable costs are linked to the level of production. So in a way, you have to consider capacity. So if you have a factory that produces phones, let's say per day they can produce up to 5,000 phones at the maximum capacity or optimal capacity. That means if you start producing more than 5,000 phones per day, you're going over capacity. You'll have to use more electricity. There will be more maintenance issues. There could be more accident, which could increase the cost. However, if you go under capacity, that means you're burning more electricity for no reason. It's the same example why restaurants do the same thing every night. If they have happy hours or in the afternoon when they charge a lower price for their menus, is because they want to fill up all the seats so they don't go under capacity. What does under capacity mean? Let's say if you open your restaurant in the afternoon and you have to turn on the lights, you have to turn on the stove, you have to turn on the electricity, you have to turn on the television, the music, and all these things, and only 5 people show up for the whole afternoon. You wasted a lot of energy and money just to entertain 5 people, whereas if you could have entertained 50 people in your area or in your restaurant. That is why you get these promotional offers from Groupon and all those to come and eat at their place. And that is why they want to be at optimal capacity. But if they go over capacity, let's say your restaurant can cater to 50 people on average per hour. And if you have 100 people coming in, you lose 50 customers because they can't wait for you. That's why most people who run a restaurant, they do drive-throughs or order out, so they can serve those waiting customers. So customers might be like, okay, I don't want to sit and eat. Maybe I can just take it home or take it back to where I was as in a doggy bag or in my form of a takeaway. Fine. So what is total cost? Total cost is combination of fixed and variable costs for any given level of production. So at any point on that curve, if you point out what is the total cost, it has to be fixed plus variable cost. Now for this, you can look at the book and it'll explain in a much clearer fashion. And I will just move along to the next slide. Now this is kind of scary to look at, so don't get afraid. I'll explain to you what is cost as a function of production. Remember what I said about optimal cost and undercapacity and overcapacity? Well, here's the deal. In the first graph that you see, it's said this SRAC stands for short run curve, and it's what it means is, in the short run, if you're going to produce something, the cost per unit drops at optimal capacity, which is 1,000 units. At 1,000 units, what happens is you're at optimal capacity. But you start producing more at a higher capacity, up to here or here, it could cause the machinery in the factory to overload, overheat. It might need even more oil or more electricity. So it's just too much of a load for the factory or the machineries to operate, or even for the people. The opposite is the same, like I just explained the restaurant issue. If you're under capacity, then let's say if you're producing only 200 units a day, whereas you should be producing 1,000, then you're burning more electricity for no reason, because machinery operates at its regular electricity capacity. It takes up certain voltage, so it uses certain energy, and if you don't use it to the max, you're just wasting electricity. That's why sometimes your parents would say at night, if you're not watching TV or anything, shut it off. Or and they wouldn't say shut it off from the remote control. They'd say switch it off from the back because electricity is still being used. That is the whole idea behind here. On the other side, that's a long run curve compared to a short run. Instead of now here's an option. Sometimes people open up two production plants, 1 and 2, because they have to produce maybe 2,000 units. Then they say, oh, we are still under, our demand is going high for, let's say, Apple phones. That's what Apple phones are produced in China. So as the quantity keeps on increasing, that does not mean you keep on opening new factories. Maybe you should open just one big factory and find out where is your actual optimal curve. So instead of opening up 4 factories, you could have opened up one factory with which has an optimal production of 3,000 units. And so as you can see, the cost keeps dropping 1, 2 to 3, and then you don't need the 4th one at all. So that is also a consideration for most people in cost base. It's very complicated. This thing happens a lot in digital equipment, in car manufacturing, in other firms where there's constantly high demand. And what happens in the near future, especially in digital equipments and even car manufacturing, is most of the machinery becomes obsolete because there's new technology coming in. They need to upgrade the machinery, they need to upgrade the robots that are placed. So it can be really painstaking to keep on opening new plants. So it would be better to have one big plant that operates with a few new machinery from time to time. And that's how majority of the people work in the industry. But now this is old school. In the new school techniques, you first assess everything. You assess your demand, you assess the value of what you want, and accordingly build to capacity. And if you shortfall of capacity, the problem with the long-run aggregate curve is complete opposite, meaning that you set up such a big plant, now how will you dismantle it and sell it off? Now, that's a very different theory. It's called an exit strategy. It's for another time. Moving along. Now, cost is a function of production experience in terms of units produced. Now, what is experience? Let me give you an example. What's the first time you ever learned to cook something? I learned to cook an omelet, and in the beginning it seemed very scary. Breaking an eggshell, oh my God. When you break an eggshell, some of the shells drop into the bowl. Then you pluck them out, and then you put a little bit of salt and pepper, and then you stir it with an egg beater or a fork. It doesn't turn, and sometimes turn out too salty. initially when people are doing new things, they take a lot of time. But over time and with practice, you become much more clever. You become much more smooth in doing your things. So you learn to produce very quickly. Such as when you go to a bakery and you can see those guys are working very quickly, or even to McDonald's, how they assemble a burger very quickly. So if the guy's new on the job, he'll take more time. But if the guy's been there for quite some time, he will produce at a professional speed. That's the same thing when you open up a factory. Some people, when they're assembling new units of digital equipment, packaging things, if they're slow, they're usually an internee or learning on the job. But when they get faster and pick up experience, they pack things faster, they assemble things much more quickly. So what happens is, with time and with experience, cost per unit of production also drops the same way. So initially, let's say it took around $10 to produce around something close to 110,000 worth of units. That's quite a lot. But as time goes by, uh, let's say if in order to it takes almost $8 to produce maybe 250,000 worth of units, meaning per unit the cost price has dropped a lot. And I don't mean 250,000, meaning as more and more things are produced, experience increases, per unit cost also shifts from 10 to 8, from 8 to 6, but let's be realistic, I think it'll be somewhere around here. I won't go too far down. There's always human capacity issues, there's always robots and factory equipment issues, so it's also an optimal thing. There's only so much faster they can get. But of course, there's technology and it keeps on improving things. There's research and development, how to build new products much more faster using different materials and all. So that's why there's always R&D done to find out how we can produce things at a faster rate at optimal cost. And I don't mean lower cost, I'm talking about optimal cost, which is much more different. Okay, let me clear this up. Move along to the next slide. Now, what is cost plus pricing? This is very simple. You have a certain cost, you just add a standard markup. A standard markup is a margin. If it costs you $10 to produce a certain equipment, you put a €50 markup, 50% markup, that's $15. So what are the benefits? Sellers are very certain about the cost, meaning retailers, distributors, and all, they pick up certain margins and they know what to sell at. And also prices are similar in the industry, so the competition is minimized. Just like when Coke and Pepsi cost €1 to buy a can because they're producing the same method. So this also encourages competition to be fair to each other, and it allows people to have options there. But if you buy a Red Bull, it costs €2 because maybe the process is different. So most energy drinks are worth €2 or €3, but they also are much more in quantity rather compared to a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi-Cola. What are the disadvantages? Number one, it ignores demands and competitor pricing, meaning you are more of a supply-run company than you're a demand run. You're not assessing demand. You're just bulking out things like product or production concept, and you ignore the fact that the way you put a markup on things, even though it's fixed for competition's sake, it may not be fair. Some people are, for example, like Apple, who do product concept or production concept in a way. I'd rather feel they do product concept. They're not assessing their demand. They just push out things and they push it out to their retailers, they push it out to their distributors, and because they benefit from low cost production in China, they charge a higher markup. So their biggest competition is Samsung, because Samsung is also based in Asia and South Korea, and due to their resources they can produce things at a very low cost. So these two giants can charge a higher markup. However, other people suffer, like HTC, LG, and all. So if you're not in the same game as these people, you will suffer in terms of competitor pricing. You can't make enough margins to survive. Moving along. Break-even analysis. I hope you don't do cost accounting, but when you do see cost accounting, you will see break-even analysis is the biggest factor in determining how many units you need to produce and sell. So there's a selling part here, where selling and production, the costs are equal, meaning break-even pricing is the price at which total costs are equal to total revenue. Revenue means sales, and therefore there's no profit. So when they say, when will I break even? So let's say you launch a business and you start producing a certain product and start selling it in the market after maybe 6 months. You hope to break even within the next 2 years. So your investors and your employees, even your board of directors, have a good idea that most companies should break even within 2 to 3 years to catch up with all their costs, their fixed costs. It's normal. And then there's something called target return pricing. This is the price at which the firm will break even or make its profits it's been seeking all this time. What's the difference? Uh, I mean, you have to set a certain price on your products. So one is the number of units, while the other is a price. So at which price will you actually break even in terms of also flowing quantity? But the first one is just quantity as the main factor. Let's move along a bit. Now, competition-based pricing is setting price based on competitor strategies, cost, prices, and market offerings. Meaning, your first thing that you take into consideration is the competition. Samsung is a great example. When Samsung decided to finally make smartphones, they priced themselves slightly lower than the Apple phone. Apple phone is somewhat of a premium phone product. Samsung came out with a phone and said, we are not that premium, but we're not that low either. So it costs you $600 to buy an Apple iPhone. It'll only cost you $500 to buy ours, plus we have more functionality. And because they wanted to fill the gap of people who wanted to buy something like a smartphone but weren't willing to part with too much of their money in their perception, they felt that $600 was above their price ceiling. So, Samsung says, you know what? If that's your price ceiling, is $500 or $450, we are the people that you should come to. Consumers will base their judgments of a product's value on the prices that competitors charge for similar products. So this is somewhat of a psychological test. Asking a few people blindly that how much should this product cost in terms of smartphone. Now they've already been exposed to an Apple phone which costs way too much to their price, like $600 to $700. So when Samsung comes out with $500, they're like, you know what? I think it will be just as good. But in terms of subjective quality, it did not have a glass back. It did not, and it seemed big, so some people call it ugly. However, Samsung said, look, we are not Apple. We're Samsung. We allow functionality. You can change the battery. You can insert more memory. It's a big phone. It's not a phone. It's a phablet. So they had those things to play on. Which is called the marketing offerings. Moving along. Now we come back to the same place. Consideration setting price. Number one is, what is the perception of the customer compared to production cost? Now, throughout all this discussion, we had a lot to talk about when you're producing something and you're adding markup to it. The biggest problem is how much markup can you add, or I would say skim off, that you don't make too much losses. So now that Apple's facing the same issue, that they try to skim off a bit and they start losing brand power. For them, they have to charge higher price. So they're in a bit of trouble. But there are other things to consider according to your company, according to the pestle environment, the political situation, economic situation, social cultural trends, technological infrastructure, and all these things also make a part of the price. It's not what you're just doing or asking the customer, but if you're going to enter into a market, you got to give consideration to how people perceive your company, and are there other influences to allow people to even purchase your product at the right price, perceived price, that is. So let's move along. So number one, target costing. This starts with an ideal selling price based on consumer value consideration, and then target cost will ensure that the price is met. Meaning, we first find out what is ideal to sell our product on, but we research the customer and we ask them, how much do you think this car should cost? If they show him as a luxury car, of course, they would probably say $50,000 to $60,000. If they show him a regular sedan, they might say $20,000. So, and then we have to find out how much it will cost to produce this certain item, and then adding a markup on top of it should match with the price. So, what are the organizational considerations? Number one, who should set the price? The consumer, us, the upper direction, the manufacturer, the suppliers, who? Because if you learn from Michael Porter in strategic management, there's also the bargaining power of the customers, bargaining power of the suppliers, and it really depends on both of them. So it's a very tough decision. Not one is right. But then who can influence the prices is back to the same thing. Does the market influence the prices? The consumers? The suppliers? Who influences the prices? For example, when I'm going to talk a lot about Apple because most people can relate to it at your generation. When Steve Jobs invited all, or rather I would say he didn't invite, more like a threat. He called all the music producers and to his Apple office and said, I'm producing the iPod and we'll have an iTunes service and you will charge 99 cents for one iTunes. And the executive said we had to say yes because he was Steve Jobs. So the manufacturer was influencing the prices onto the supplier. He had that much power. So that's a consideration. Or in other terms, when you have to buy petrol for your car, who influences the prices? It's the supplier. At one point it was Saudi Arabia, then America started doing fracking, then there's Venezuela, Iran, and all these. They influence prices because they supply it. And then if they put some sort of embargo on not selling, or if they block out their petrol or even gas to another country, the other people can suffer a lot in terms of price hikes. And let's give another consideration to the market and demand. Now, demand is a function of price and quantity. It's set by how much people want a certain product, and accordingly, we could raise the price or lower the price. So before setting prices, the marketer must understand the relationship between price and demand. So I'll show it to you. This is the demand curve. This shows the number of units the market will buy in a given period of time at different prices. So it says here, the higher the demand in terms of quantity, the lower the prices can be. Oh, here, as you see this point, it can go up to maybe a unit of 6 can be sold at $1. Normally, demand and price are inversely related. Higher prices equals to lower demand, meaning if I'm going to charge $10 for a McDonald's burger, I don't think anyone would want it. Therefore, I have to reduce it to somewhere to $4 or $5, match the perception of the people, what they really want and how much they're willing to part with their money, and therefore lower my price in place. But for luxury goods, it's the opposite way, because luxury is not supposed to be mass produced, such as diamond rings or jewelry or leather goods. Higher prices can equal higher demand when consumers perceive higher prices as higher quality. Bingo, psychology. And that's why the Apple phone costs more. And that's subjective quality. Please do not confuse quality with functionality. Going back a bit, we won't be discussing pure competition. It's not necessary. Now, here's an interesting concept regarding the demand curve, price elasticity. Now, in order to explain price elasticity, I'm going to move to the next slide and show you in action. Now, here's the thing. Imagine if a cinema ticket, which costs around $10, were to drop its price for up to $8. Would there be a big change in quantity or demand? Not so much. So it shows here a little drop in price does not have a huge impact on demand, maybe just a little bit more. So when there's not enough shifting of demand according to price drop, we call that inelastic demand, meaning demand is inelastic. However, let's say the price did drop for a cinema ticket from $10 to $8, and the demand shot up by quite a great leap, meaning at one point we were only expecting 20,000 people. Now we got 40,000. That's 100% more. So we say demand is highly elastic. A little change or drop in price yields a higher demand. Now this works a lot for different products or nature of product, which could be luxury. When they drop by, if they cost, let's say, $1,000 and they drop down to 700 or even 600, people really wish to buy it because they say, you know what, I don't think another opportunity like this will come. But in everyday low pricing or low strategy, it probably might not work. But it might work for deal breaker people, but usually people are buying every day, so it's that strategy only works in maybe during sale times or sale season, but not anytime else. So that's price elasticity for you guys. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Let's continue. So there's a few things that I would like to rack up. Economic conditions are the biggest factor because they could have conditions such as taxes, duties, in certain countries like mine. I come from Pakistan. If you're going to import a brand new car into the country, they will charge you a higher duty, meaning it will have import duty on it, it'll have other taxes on it, and your car will shoot up to a 250% price. Other economic conditions could also mean purchasing power of the consumer. Now, McDonald's has something called the Global Big Mac Index or the Burger Index, and they know at what country how much money they should charge per burger. In the US, a Big Mac is not that expensive, maybe $5, but here in France, it's up to €7, and they know people can afford it. So it's kind of expensive in a way, but they feel that the purchasing power or the standard of living in France is higher. Then there's also the reseller response to price. Now, a reseller could be a retailer, a distributor, or the sort. And it also affects their business how we price our product or what conditions we put. That in certain cases, can they put a discount? Do they have to sell at this fixed price? So if we raise our prices, it could hurt their business, that nobody might come to their shops, nobody might come to their stores. Or if you lower the prices, they could enjoy better margins, but if they lower the price, that means they too might have to lower the price. So it's a give and take relationship. The government, once again, it's the same. In certain countries, they can also fix the price, drop the prices. Like here in France, or most likely in the RER stations, we have a Navigo card. It's a metro and bus card. At one point, everything was based on different zones. The further you are in zone 5 and all, it will cost you up to €113 to travel back and forth into Paris. But now the government has imposed that the prices should be up to €70. And a lot of people benefited from this. So the government too has a role in pricing, and they control prices. They're regulatory bodies, and they look into this, or even on interest rate for bank loans, mortgages. So to see that no one is sort of ripping off the public. And ripping off the public comes social concerns. In the sense that if you charge too much interest rate on credit card or on your mortgage, that happened in the USA when there was a financial crisis, mortgages went up too high, a lot of people lost their houses. So there can be other social concerns in the sense that if you're raising prices of petrol or heating, electricity or water, people will suffer. So these two affect prices. In some countries who are under loan from IMF and the World Bank, and they have to pay back their loans, so most of the government removes subsidies from certain areas such as electricity, gas, and petrol, and they pass on the cost to the public. While the public already suffers from taxes, they also have to suffer from death. Sorry about that. Was kind of morbid, but then again. Now, just a little bit of summary and a breather that all of you can take. Let's recap pricing. So we discussed two types of pricing: value-based versus cost-based, or I could say the marketing strategy of pricing versus the traditional cost accounting-based pricing. And we found out that value-based pricing is the way to go. You assess the demand, you assess the need and want of the customer, you design your product according to that, and then you calculate cost of production. And finally, you roll out your strategy. Whereas in cost-based was that you produce a product, you calculate the cost, you manufacture it according to supply mode, and then you convince people to buy, which is product and production concept. And we learned about target costing as well, which was in a way of matching our target pricing according to how many units we will sell, therefore that we can break even. And the biggest thing to consider is price elasticity about your product when you brand something. If you lower the price, how much shift will there be in terms of demand? Now, this is kind of scary thing to do, so don't start right away if you don't know too much about economics. Let's take a pause here, and then we'll continue with part two. Doo -doo 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 -doo.